Welcome everyone to this first progress report on the Regional Water Resources Plan for Eastern England. Water Resources East was the only one of the regional water resource bodies to publish its water resources plan thus far, and therefore we are now in this position of publishing our annual progress report, and that's what we're going to spend the next hour and a half or so looking at, considering and answering questions about. So you're very welcome. My name's Paul Leinster. I'm the independent chair of Water Resources East. So just to begin with, some housekeeping notes. Microphones and cameras have been switched off to avoid background noise. If you could use the chat, the Teams chat, for general technical issues. So if you have any technical issues during the presentation, go to the chat button. But if you've got questions that you want to raise, either in the panel discussion or for people to answer more immediately, then please use the Teams Q&A function. Both of those should be at the top of your screens. The session is being recorded, and we'll be making the slides and the recording available on our website after the meeting. So the agenda for today, as you see, this is the welcome and introductions. Then we'll have a progress report. Daniel, Ben and Alice will take us through various sections of that. Then we've got a number of people who will be talking to us about sector perspectives. Lindsay Hargreaves from the Log Abstractors Group, who's also a WRE board member, will be talking about agriculture, and then Alexa Sherry, who is Future Resources Programme Manager at Anglian Water, and Hamish Nicol will be talking about hydrogen, and then Paul Mumford, who's with Urban and Civic and also a WRE board member, will be talking about development issues as well, and Mark Betson will also be talking with Lindsay about agricultural considerations, and then we'll go into the panel Q&A. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Daniel to take us through the progress report.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and welcome everybody to this launch webinar of our first ever annual progress report. So yeah, delighted to spend the next half an hour between myself, Ben and Alice to present the headline findings. Obviously, we haven't got time to cover every aspect of the report. It's kind of packed full of progress and developments that have taken place over the last 12 months. And that's why we published the report itself on our website a week ago, to give you time, if you had it, to take a look, to dive into it, to start to kind of understand what it talks about, and obviously to prompt questions, which hopefully we'll be able to answer for you this afternoon. Hopefully everyone knows Water Resources East, what we are, what we're trying to do as an independent not-for-profit membership organisation. We're one of the 5 regional water resources groups established and tasked under the National Framework for Water Resources to create a regional water resources plan for their respective interests, respective regions. But of course, WRE is constituted slightly differently to the regional groups. We are independent. We're a separate not-for-profit company, and our board it consists of representatives from local authorities, the different kind of water using sectors, and of course those environmental stakeholder interests as well. Importantly, the board signed off our original original regional plan published in December 2023, and also our board approved the progress report for publication. And I guess what that, the reason for saying that is that I think the progress report actually, really strengthens and reinforces WRE's independence, and our progress report represents our kind of our objective multi-sector view of everything that happened on the water resources front in 2024. What our report tries to do is summarise, given the regional plan itself is now remarkably already over a year old, and that the Environment Agency expects regional groups to monitor and report on the progress being made. We wanted to do so in a kind of short, sharp, fairly concise, engaging, and clearly evidence-based way. But it is our first progress report, and we'd love feedback on what you think. How can we strengthen the report for future iterations, which we expect to publish each January going forward? And also just to recognise that we thought long and hard about when during the course of the year should we publish each progress report. 2024 was a remarkable year in many cases, as we'll go through in the slide pack. General election, but importantly also the price review 2024 process concluded in December. So not only do we want to look back at the progress being made against the metrics that we're going to be tracking, published by water companies, we also want to launch the progress report at a point where we could discuss and debate the outcome of the price review 2024 process. Now, after Paul's forward in the progress report, we've tried to summarise on a single page, so the progress report on a page in a multi-sector way, everything that we think is important and has been achieved by everybody working collectively together in the previous calendar year. So that's what you've got on the screen. But also just to say on the screen, you've got a direct link to the report itself and we'll post that to the chat too. So 2024 was really quite remarkable in many ways. It was a very wet year. It was unsettled. It was warm globally. It looks like provisionally, at least, temperatures were 1.55 degrees warmer than pre-industrial level. So we've been talking about 1.5 degree threshold in terms of the kind of changing climates. Well, at least from an annual year perspective, that was broken last year. It was also a year in which the kind of the water scarcity pressures from growth kind of came to a head, particularly in and around Cambridge. We had that general election, and post-election, really the focus of the new government has been about stimulating economic growth. And that's important to us because clearly we have to accommodate that growth within our plans and support different sectors' ambitions for economic development. We've got new housing targets, the kind of return to mandatory housing targets from the new government, and that's what the chart on the right-hand side tries to show. Exactly where will those housing targets be stretched the most. And as part of that, you just to recognise and reinforce the growing importance that new appointment and variation companies will have in determining kind of the long-term regional scale demand side metrics, because new appointment and variation companies will be the water suppliers for increasing proportion of households and non-household customers in the region. And so the kind of the incentive system for new appointment and variation companies is an important thing that we reflect upon in the progress report. But to get us into the detail, I was going to hand over to Alice Rigg at this point to talk about the public water supply components of our plan.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Hi, I'm Alice Rigg. I'm Technical Analyst at Water Resources East. And to start with, we'll be looking at the water sector has made towards meeting the demand reductions targets. So the work that the water companies are progressing on to reduce their demand is a key dependency of our regional plan, because it sets out how much water there is available to us. As such, we've committed to tracking the progress against the targets set out in the DEFRA's plan for water. These include the household consumption, the non-household consumption, and these are encapsulated by the distribution input, which is essentially the amount of raw water extracted and provided per person. So in these graphs, you'll see coming up, you'll see the reported figures on the left-hand side with those lines for each company, and then the trajectory is in the dotted line towards the right, heading into the future and heading towards that national target, but also sets out what the regional plan expects to happen. So on distribution input per capita, we can see that the member water companies are on target, thankfully. This is towards that 20% reduction on the 2019 baseline. And this is thanks to the great work that the member water companies have been doing on leakage. They're doing well against the other companies as well. And they're also working well on reducing the per capita consumption. So looking in more detail at some of these components, on the graph on the left-hand side, we've got the household per capita consumption. And this is how much water each of us use per day. This is heading towards that 122 litres per head per day target by 2038. And the green line again is our regional plan target. So you can see the peak there for COVID, and that we've managed to bring back down our levels to pre-COVID levels. And overall, we are reducing our usage. And this is helped also by the household metering targets on the right-hand side. And this is heading towards that full metering target by 2038, which we are also thankfully heading in the right direction for. This smart metering is important because it does help us track our usage, and it also helps looking for things like leaky loos and how effective the water consumption campaigns are. On the smart metering as well, we've also like to highlight the Anglian Water's key milestone of installing their millionth meter, which puts them well on target for rolling out full metering by 2030 ahead of schedule. So on the non-household side, this is a bit more of a challenging target. This is obviously because it's linked to the growth of businesses in our region, which we don't want to constrain by the lack of water. So the national target is a 9% absolute reduction by 2038. And we set out in our regional plan, we're targeting a 2.7 versus the relative to growth. And this is due to the fact that there was growth that occurred between the 2019 baseline and the 2023 targets being set, and also to account for the growth that will happen. So consumption fell last year, but generally the trend is upwards. And to manage this growth, all of the water companies are assessing their requests for new supply carefully. Anglian Water and Cambridge have applied that 20 meters cubed threshold for new requests, and the Hartismere moratorium on new non-domestic use will remain in place until 2032. WRE are keenly involved in the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group, which is aiming to find additional water savings in Cambridge due to their unique position of growth. So on the other side of the coin, we're looking at the supply side infrastructure. And this is also progressing nicely. These tables that we set out in the progress report detail the progress that was made after the Ofwat final determinations in Christmas, and pick out the key aspects there. So instead of going in detail on each of the key schemes in our plan, we're going to pull out some of the headlines. So the inclusion of Bacton and Mablethorpe desalination and the North Suffolk Reservoir have now been added to the same strategic resource options pathway as the Lincolnshire and Fens reservoirs. And we've also got the admission of Colchester and Lowestoft advanced water recycling, so the new large scheme gated process as well. And this demonstrates the necessity of these schemes and allows them to receive the support that they need to get going as soon as possible. There were also some admissions of new schemes that the companies have added into their adaptive pathways, which a few of them we're still working on seeing how they'll get progressed. We're keeping up to date with the water companies on these, and we'll keep updated as they go through. So on the Lincolnshire and Fens reservoirs, we're pleased to report that the Secretary of State has endorsed these schemes, and they've both been progressing nicely through their gated process. They both completed their second round of public consultation last year, and they'll be submitting their gate 3 submissions in 2025 later this year. Similarly to the reservoirs, the 2 desalination plants are now having investigations to see how the multi-sector benefits may occur with these, which Alexa will be talking through in more detail later. And to keep to that multi-sector option view, I'll be passing on now to Ben to see how the other non-public water supply sectors have been getting on.
Thanks, Alice. Just checking, Daniel and Nod, if you can hear me. Okay, great. So yeah, as Alice said, following on from the huge amount of work being undertaken and progressing in the water industry associated with the water companies and the work they do with us, there's been some really exciting developments in other sectors that depend on or use water heavily, nationally and within our region. And we have, as you all know, you're aware of a huge stress of other sectors all drawing on various demands all alongside the environmental pressures and ambitions we have in various parts of across our catchments within the region. So looking at agriculture specifically initially, the risk is we actually take credit for a lot of work the Environment Agency have done here, but they've really been working very hard alongside all the regional groups and under the umbrella of the National Framework for Water Resources, which is due to be updated later this year. In particular, focusing on the drive to get more funding and more resources and a stronger governance structure around how agriculture can upskill itself and have greater sense of ownership around water resources management as we move forward into this regional and integrated water resource planning world. So in 2024, there were new governance structures and new funding made available for regional groups. And we were successful as WRE in 2 rounds of funding from the Environment Agency. One was to fund an official position for agriculture on WRE's board. And then later in the year, we were successful in securing additional funding for resources to work closely with the Environment Agency on a number of their specific work streams. And in addition to that, get some resourcing for some funding for manpower resource within the team itself, which is really exciting. So the 2 key work streams that we've been working closely with the Environment Agency on are agricultural catchment supply demand balance assessments and local resource option studies. And just briefly, if lots of people aren't necessarily aware of those, the catchment supply demand balance assessments, which were trialed in our region in the Cammon EUs last year and now being rolled out more widely, are a really important step at a catchment level of being able to articulate what's available for agriculture versus what they need now and in the future, and also taking into account how future pressures on abstraction licenses might change that picture alongside climate change. And there's been some really exciting work in the Cammon EUs in particular as their trial development catchment with Cranfield University to better understand the farm level water storage stock across that catchment. So that's really going to help us as a regional group play into that sector and help them understand how their options and solutions can play a part of solving our catchment wide and regional issues. Now, to support that in kind of a parallel work stream are these local resource option studies. And I think there were around 20 nationally, 12 of them were kickstarted in our region, as shown in the map on the right of your screen there. These are groups of farmers that voluntarily applied for the Environment Agency to undertake a group level assessment and screening exercise of potential new options available to them that might either increase access to water or help them optimize the way they're using water resources between themselves, typically in the range of 3 to half a dozen farmers in each of these studies. We've been tapping into these studies and supporting their work and helping them engage with wider stakeholders in the region. And excitingly, we also have another project where we'll be looking to integrate the long lists of options emerging for those projects into our regional planning processes. So the Environment Agency has also awarded a small amount of funding to carry out that piece of work that will hopefully inform our next round of planning. So lots of exciting stuff happened in 2024, and hot off the press right before Christmas, the Environment Agency awarded us a project to undertake a scoping study to explore and scope out a potential new trial somewhere within the region, potentially associated with the wider growth issues, not just in farming, but impacting on our catchments, to scope out what a smart farming trial might do and what gaps it might plug in our overall goals towards integrated water resources management. So over the next 3 months, Teresa Meadows, who's new to the team, will be leading that project on our behalf. So thinking beyond agriculture into other sectors, this is where I really lean heavily on the good work of the Environment Agency. And under that National Framework for Water Resources, a number of really exciting studies have been taken up, beginning with a national forecast of water requirements for the energy sector up through looking out to 2050, and we will be able to directly use that evidence to inform our next round of planning and focus our efforts. But an important one from my perspective is the follow-up study that is being undertaken to explore how barriers to collaboration between sectors, and in this case specifically the energy and water sectors, might be overcome. And that project's coming out with a route map and clear actions and pieces of work that we need to be doing collectively to move that forward if we're to plan things in a more joined up way. So that's really important. And that piece of work focused on energy sits alongside a wider multi-sector piece that looks at the impacts of water scarcity on other users, in particular sectors like the leisure sector that we don't often talk about a lot, but at a business level and at those subsector levels are nonetheless really important to understand how water demands and the availability of water to them is going to play out in the future. I'm also really happy to say that our key energy, navigation and representatives from other sectors remain fully engaged in WRE's work, of course, as always, and we're really grateful to them and their time. And we do now have a new governance structure and technical working group and a strategy group focused specifically on the environmental destination package of work. And those sectors all have formalized places within the governance structure in the terms of reference of those groups. So as we work with the Environment Agency on the developing approaches to the longer term environmental destination program, they're going to be there working with us to make sure that's delivering for all of our interests. So onto the environment. As you are probably aware if you've read the report, the environment and our ambitions for it and the freshwater environment are the biggest single driver investment and the schemes that we need in our plan. And those changes can often feel quite distant, a long way off in the future. We're talking about abstractions needed to improve and enhance environments by some time towards 2050. But what we really wanted to begin to reflect in our progress report, with this being the first, was that licenses, abstractions are being reviewed all the time on a yearly basis. There are licenses across sectors, agriculture, the water industry, the other sectors I've named, all the time through either the catchment common end date process or the upcoming catchment permit review process when that kicks off in the latter part of this decade, and currently investigations linked to European wetland sites. These are all happening, they're live, and they all represent effectively part of that pathway towards sustainable catchments that our regional plan looks to facilitate and build upon. So what we did, at least for this first progress report, is to work directly with our water company members to collate a list of abstractions that have been changed or intend to be changed by the end of this financial year. So working back to 2023 and through to the end of this financial year. And you can see by the numbers on that chart, there are big numbers in play. In large part, these are related to holding the line and preventing further deterioration in the environment, but in some cases, specific investigations around HABs regs and things like that. But we do have an ambition in the forthcoming progress reports to continue to track this and get smarter on the way we do this with the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency, of course, managed an individual license review process. We don't, as a regional group, handle individual licenses. But that data is there, and we're working with key representatives at the EA to make sure we can collate that and present that in a much more sectoral and catchment basis as we go through time and start to reduce the uncertainty that we're all facing around what the environmental ambition means for everyone involved. So that'll be an exciting one to take forward in coming years, but we're glad to have at least been able to make a start on collating that information to push the agenda forward. And in terms of the environmental destination investigations themselves, it's a huge piece of work. We talk about it an awful lot, but as I say, it's the biggest single driver of investment in the plan. And we're pleased to say that thanks to early start water industry national environment funding from Angling Water and now co-funding from the Environment Agency from an agricultural perspective, we've been able to get started on that ahead of the start of the next planning round, which is really exciting for us. So that early start funding has already allowed us to enter into, I think we're up to 3 contracts now. Big one with the consortium of consultancies working on the UK water industry research framework for environmental destinations. So we're going to be kicking off a lot of the technical analysis and data crunching that we need to embark on these investigations and focus our efforts. But preempting that, we have already, in fact, we've published the first report under the umbrella of the Environmental Destination Investigations Programme. It's a catchment characterisation and prioritisation report developed by Atkins Roas on our behalf. And that's there on the website, available for everyone to look at and allow us to start speaking in the same language, helping us to explore what the opportunities and risks are across our catchments and help focus our attention and efforts in the right places. And for now, our initial focus to trialing new developing approaches is intended to be in the Camanile Leeuws and the Suffolk Water Framework Directive management catchments for various reasons outlined in that report and other locations. So for those that are working with us on the ED investigation programme and continue to do that ahead of guidance, ahead of final data, we really appreciate your time because this is a huge piece of work and we can't hang around. So we're grateful for everyone's input to that. So hopefully the progress report does that some justice this time, and there'll be more to see in future reports. And I'll hand over to Daniel to start talking about other steps around policy developments.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, absolutely. So we want to reinforce that it's not just for water companies, different sectors to be making progress in line with what our regional plan expects, but it's also, incumbent on the government and regulators to help companies, abstractors, and others take steps forward. So just first of all, on the right-hand side of this chart, you can see how important government-led interventions are to the overall demand management strategy that we set out in our progress report. So more than a third of the water savings that we need by 2050, we hope will be delivered through government-led action, policy reform, regulatory reform, to help people use less water. General election 2024, of course, inevitably led to some delays in policies being announced. New ministers needed to get up to speed, read into their briefs, and then take the in-tray of policy reforms across different sectors through in priority order. That has to say inevitably led to some delays in some of the policies that we hoped would be announced and started to be introduced late last year. But hopefully, firm announcements and policies will be implemented in this calendar year and perhaps into 2026. The most important of those, for us at least, is that mandatory water labelling on tap showers, toilets, washing machines, dishwashers, and other water using appliances will be introduced by the end of this calendar year. I think initially it was going to be summer 2025, but we hear from policy officials that they do still hope and expect for mandatory water labelling to come in by December. We were also expecting a consultation on tighter building regulations, water standards, water efficiency standards in building regulations. And we're still hoping there will be a consultation early in 2025 to inform implementation in 2026. There's less progress, realistically, on the water fittings regulations, which are needed to design out kind of leaky loos from new toilets being sold today, and also changes in drinking water regulations that are needed to support dual supply systems within new development. So, allowing communal use of grey and rainwater harvesting systems to flush toilets, to water gardens, and that kind of thing. But there is a lot of progress, particularly focused around Greater Cambridge, direct input both to MHCLG as the Housing Ministry, as well as to DEFRA, about policy reforms to generate additional water savings over and above what Cambridge Water and Anglian Water in this particular context can achieve alone. And hopefully there'll be more announcements soon about kind of the water credit market and funding from MHCLG to invest in kind of schools and hospitals and the Cambridge University estate, as well as to help households use less water day to day. So 2025 is set to be another busy year, and in our progress report we try to set out, at least in headline terms, what we expect to happen when. A lot of this is timetables will slip, no doubt, where it says spring. Sometimes the government spring doesn't necessarily align to the kind of the spring as we would expect it. So, for example, the National Framework for Water Resources, the second version of that framework we expect to come out this spring, but that's likely probably to be kind of June, July time. The Water Commission is one of the most significant things happening certainly in the first half of this year. So this is the independent commission being led by Sir John Cunliffe, making recommendations direct to ministers on how to reform the water sector and the wider kind of planning for environmental improvement. And we think regional groups have a role to play in that, and we've already started to feed into to that inquiry. Ben's already mentioned the environmental destination studies. We're also expecting updated water resources planning guidance. During the course of 2025, water companies will also be updating their drought management plans, which again, WRE will take a role in at that regional scale. And as Alice has already mentioned, there's lots of activity happening around individual strategic resource options. The Fens Reservoir going to Gate 3 in March, the Links Reservoir going to Gate 3 as part of the rapid process in September. So a huge amount happening during the course of 2025, which we'll of course reflect on by the time we get to this time next year. But finally, before we turn back and ask other people to come in and give their perspectives, we want to just to kind of make you aware of what we're really pleased about. Pleased to have launched last week again alongside the progress report is what we're calling a kind of interactive WRMP data dashboard. Again, there's a link on the slide which hopefully will work for you if you want to click on it. What it does, it brings together data sets already in the public domain, published by the Environment Agency in October, using data prepared by water companies that have gone through an audit process, and then, as I say, the Environment Agency has published it. But it allows you to drill into the detail of individual demand-side metrics on per capita consumption, non-household consumption, distribution input, even things like kind of expected population growth and so forth for every company in England and Wales, grouped by regional group. And you can see, well, what's the past performance been? How have companies performed against each of these key metrics? And then looking ahead on those dotted lines, what do they expect to happen over the next 25 years through their water resources management plans? And again, as we go forward, year by year, as progress reports get published, these data sets are updated, we can see whether or not water companies and others are on track for the assumptions that were taken by regional plans. Because what's the point of that? It's because our plans were adaptive. We presented a core pathway, but there is uncertainty. So what happens to population, what happens to climate change, what happens to the environment are all things that could trigger additional action being needed, not in 15 to 20 years, but actually in the next kind of 2, 3, 4 years. And so as our progress reports are published, we'll increasingly focus on those adaptive pathways, those triggers and decision points where we might need to take different paths and bring forward additional supply and demand side options to make sure we maintain that supply demand balance overall. So yeah, click on the link, have a look, see what you think, and again, give us your feedback, because we're publishing it as a beta, recognizing we think there's lots of value in developing these kinds of tools further. But that's enough from me and the team. What I was going to do is perhaps invite Lindsay, first of all, to give his perspectives on our regional plan from an agricultural point of view. And then Lindsay will hand on to Alexa and Hamish, and then on to Paul Mumford after that. So Lindsay, can I bring you in at this point?
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good afternoon, everybody. So yes, a few comments and reflections from an agricultural point of view on this. A year ago, we were still saying that there was some sort of disappointment or frustration that as a sector, we were finding it difficult to build capacity to engage in the process, try as we might, but resources and other things were getting in the way. And it's very encouraging to see that, I mean, a year ago there was promise, and 24 has delivered some of that. Things are changing. It's heading in the right direction, and I just want to comment a little bit on those sorts of things. But just by way of an opener, to remind us that, what does agriculture need from a resources planning process of this sort? And what we're looking for, like everyone else, is resilient water supplies, but in our case, water for crop irrigation, for livestock, and for food processing. But the big one in this region is crop irrigation, so that's where the focus is. But the others are equally are also very important. All the evidence, as we've been hearing again today, we know that access to water as we know it today is threatened. The way we access water is under threat. We have to look at the impacts of environmental remediation, of climate change, and competing demands for water. So we know that things are going to have to change. And what can we expect? What it is reasonable for agriculture to expect from that process? And I think we can summarize it in 3 points. One is an open and transparent, evidence-based decision-making process based on sound science. So when we're asked to do stuff, we know why, and we can believe it. We can sign up to it. Fair treatment in dealing with competing cross-sector needs. That we are being treated the same as any other user of water when it comes to deciding who has what, and also time and support to adapt to necessary change. And by implication on those 3 elements, I'm suggesting there is still work to do, that agriculture doesn't feel that it's in quite the right place, but we are making moves and doing what we can to shift that. So we'll look a little bit at what the national framework and regional groups can offer in this process. What has agriculture done to help itself? And that point is being made. These systems are not in place to do the work for us. We have to take responsibility. So what have we been doing, and who's helping us, and what support can we expect from others? And another thing that we do remind ourselves from time to time, just to sense check the whole process, is that we have to remember that it's DEFRA and government that sets the rules. It's the regulator, the Environment Agency, that applies the rules, and it's systems like the national framework and regional groups that facilitate and influence the process. So it is important for agriculture as a sector, and other sectors too, I'm sure, to have that line of sight through the process right to the very top, to know ultimately who it is that we need to impress, where we need to get the messages to, and to use all the levers and tools along the way to achieve that. So in terms of what's been happening in the WRE region in 2024, in addition to all the good work that WRE and the National Framework have been doing for us, so people in farming, people in agriculture have been contributing to that work with WRE and the National Framework. We have engaged with the Environment Agency, or continue to engage with the EA on near-term licensing issues, and that's particularly the restoring sustainable abstraction and common end date reviews, which are immediate and they are important because they are under very close scrutiny. So there is a lot of work happening with that. We've worked quite hard on the development of governance and structural capability for the sector. Ben made that reference. How do we build that? And two examples I can think of straight away is how Water for Food is emerging as a formally constituted organisation which is structured to support agricultural interests at various levels, especially it seems with a focus on immediate near-term licensing aspects, but longer term also looking at the longer term change that we might expect. Another example that springs to mind is in my own backyard, as it were, the Riverlark Abstractors Group, which is evolving very quickly now from an informal collection, albeit quite an influential one of abstractors in a specific water unit. We have now constituted ourselves as a not-for-profit in a similar way to Water Resources East. So we are a limited company with a government structure, with the ability to raise money to support what we're doing, and a much more concerted effort to bring our abstractors into the process and be involved in what is quite an important part of their businesses. Others in the industry have worked to support the creation of new abstractor groups. We all do that in our own way, but I know one or two people in particular have worked very hard at getting out on the road, as it were, to encourage and support. And there's been active abstractor engagement with the Environment Agency's local resource option initiative. Again, as Ben has already commented, but quite a number of people have engaged in that. In other, I guess, sort of what might be described as centres of excellence or little pockets of activity, farmers have engaged in research work to help develop new technology. One I can think of immediately that I've been involved with is the South 40-foot water bank pilot study, and that's a study that's a farmer-led study that's looked at how water works, how water management could work in a low-lying level controlled area, how it works now, how it might work better in the future. And I know of other initiatives of a similar nature, and some looking at technology and other aspects of water management that are farmer-led initiatives. We are building capacity in understanding and interpreting data, and I know that of one abstractor group in northeast Norfolk, where they have really pushing ahead with this ability within their own organisation to analyse data and to understand and to be able to discuss that with the agency in very professional terms. And within agriculture, we've supported cross-sector working as well. One of the local resource option studied is a collaboration of water companies and farmers, looking at how we might work together to build water resource capability in that in a cross-sector way. In terms of people who are helping us do all of this, we know we can't do this all on our own. So we do acknowledge with great enthusiasm the support that DEFRA and DLUC, now DLUC of course is now a much snappier title, MHCLG, for bringing forward the funding through the Environment Agency, through the Water Resources Resilience Team, led by Andy Turner, in their support for funding the LROs, the catchment supply demand balance assessments, representation on regional groups, and support for WAGs. It's really good stuff. WRE, of course, in this region has worked very hard to help us move everything forward, along with the national framework. The National Farmers Union, which has supported us through direct funding and in-kind input, and through the resource and services of people like Mark Betson, who is the NFU's water resources specialist. It's been very helpful to have that. Anglian Water have helped with project funding through their sustainability programs, and Innovate UK project funding via the DEFRA Farm Innovation Programme. The United Kingdom Irrigation Association, which is a very small organisation, but really does punch way above its weight in terms of what it can and does do to support agriculture, especially in our region. And then academia, Cranfield University and the University of England, University of Lincoln, to my knowledge. There are other institutions I know that again, supporting agriculture in achieving its objectives. So looking ahead to 2025, very briefly, what kind of things are we expecting? What do we need to happen? Well, of urgent significance to us, immediate significance, is the continuing RSA and CED reviews. That's the Restoring Sustainable Abstraction and Common End Date reviews on abstraction licenses. There are 229 agricultural licenses in our region that are up for review in March 2025, 183 in 2026, and 442 in 2027, which is really, in many aspects of planning thinking, it's a bit like tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, and the day after that. This is immediate stuff. And of course, beyond that, we're looking at permit reviews and the environmental destination process. So areas where we really do not need to start building our ability to work with, to effectively work with the regulator and other actors in all of this. It's wonderful to see the agricultural stakeholder development role appearing in WRE, and we do welcome Teresa and look forward to her input in really taking us forward regionally quite strongly in this coordination, this development of that's is necessary for agriculture to extend its work. We will be looking forward to continued funding for the agriculture sector and its activity, both internal and external. And we will continue to be working on these resilience projects that will emerge from the LRO studies. And one comment I would make on those LRO studies, that in my role in WRE, I'm privileged to see those reports, those studies and their reports in their draft form. And I'm really very excited with some of the work or ideas that are coming out of those, the way that people have engaged. It really is incredibly encouraging, and I think it's seriously good value for the sector, and I hope the agency will see it in that way too. And I'm also looking forward to the smart farming study, because again, I do believe that some of the ideas that we can develop from within the sector there and support that will be pivotal to delivering some of the changes that we need. We continue to build our relationships with the Environment Agency to support the fair process, especially with time and support to adapt to change, because that is quite a limitation. And we understand the nature of the regulation, but hopefully we can continue to work together to build on that. And we will continue as well to observe and support agricultural input in other regional groups. And I think it's fair to say that it's through the efforts of the agricultural sector, through Water Resources East, we've had quite an influence on the way that other regional groups are approaching their agricultural sector thinking. And that's not to suggest that they're simply mirroring what we're doing here, but I think we are influencing the way we are doing it. So in summary, Chairman, I think the 24 has seen the establishment of important funding and governance principles for the sector. That the WRE capacity to support agriculture is developing with great promise. That the optimism for environment EA agency support for the non-public water supply sector, we're optimistic that support will continue and grow, and that this coming year is a big opportunity to set out a viable framework to support agricultural ambition and help fill in the gaps. It will continue with capacity building at abstractor and water abstractor group level, and recognise the value of the regional groups, especially Water Resources East, in developing this multi-sector working in water resources planning. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a bit on behalf of agriculture and the progress that we are making, and that we are making with the support of the regional group. So thank you very much. And with that, I hand over to Alexa and Hamish.
Thank you, Lindsay, and hi everyone. So I'm Alexa Sherry. I'm from Anglian Water. I'm a programme manager in our Future Resources team, and currently leading on our desalination programme. And as you'll all be aware, and as has been summarised by Daniel and Alice today, so we have significant challenges in our region for water resources, and we need new sources of water to meet our future demand. And one of the new options that we're pursuing is desalination. So in our water resources management plan, which was published last year, we identified the need for 3 desalination plants in our region, one in Lincolnshire, one in Norfolk, and one in Essex. And they're shown as being needed by 2040, with outputs ranging from 25 to 60 million litres per day. And as has been mentioned, all 3 are on our adaptive pathway, and that basically means that we might need them sooner, or we might need them of a different size as to what's been modelled. And actually, since we completed our WMP, we have recognised the need to accelerate the development of 2 of these projects, and that's the one in Lincolnshire and the one in Norfolk. So the primary driver to accelerate the development of our desalination plant in Lincolnshire is our industrial growth along the Humber Bank, but it will also supply potable water to our domestic customers too. And the primary driver for our plant in Norfolk is the licence caps in our region. So we have a number of groundwater abstraction licences in Norfolk which are under review. And we won't know the scale of this need until 2027, following the completion of a programme of environmental investigations. But we are currently working towards a desal plant in Norfolk of 60 million litres per day, and a plant of 50 million litres per day in Lincolnshire, both with an intersupply date currently of 2034. And that's the earliest date that we think that we can deliver these projects based on what we know now. But as I say, the scale of these projects and the time frame in which they're needed is still to be confirmed, and that will be confirmed as we progress with the development over the next few years. And thankfully, Ofwat has agreed with the need to accelerate the development of both Lincolnshire and Norfolk. So in the final determination received before Christmas, we received funding to develop these solutions next AMP, so that they are ready to start on site early 2030s. And so we've received £77 million for Norfolk to develop Norfolk, and 72 million for Lincolnshire, which is great news. And here's just showing the high level programme that we're currently working to achieve an intersupply date of 2034. So this is based on our projects going down the town and country planning route, as opposed to sort of the DCO route. And it's also based on us going down the direct procurement for customers model, which is basically the design, build, finance, operate and maintain model. And we're looking into options as to what that could look like currently. But up until now, really, our focus has been around research. So obviously desalination, it's new to us, but it is widely used internationally. And so we've got a number of studies underway to help us learn from successful desal plants across the world, and also help us sort of determine how we can ensure that we can make a success of them here. And we're also due to commence a programme of water quality monitoring of the North Sea, just to help inform our designs. And then as we enter the sort of the new AMP, we will be commencing a programme of site selection to determine the best locations for both of these projects. So in our water resources management plan, we did identify potential sites at Bacton and Mablethorpe. You may be familiar with those names. And that was for the purpose of costing and modelling in the planning. But we do now need to go through that sort of robust process just to ensure that those sites are optimal sites. And we do hope to have that completed and have preferred sites identified by the end of this year. And then once we've obtained some data, we'll be able to commence our outline design, and we'll also start the development of a pilot plant to enable us to trial the reverse osmosis technology using North Sea water, so to determine what treatment trains we need here to make it a success. And then, as I mentioned, the need will be confirmed in 2027 once the environmental investigations are complete, and then once we have that, we can further progress that design. The planning consents and procurement will follow, and that will hopefully enable us to hand over to CAP, which is the investor or the contractor, towards the end of the AMP. And that procurement strategy is still in development. There's a lot of meetings and discussions going on about that at the moment, and that time frame shown here may change based on that. But as it's currently shown, it's based on the traditional late model for DPC. And then once we've handed over, we've then allowed 4 years to complete that design, the construction and commissioning, to get the works into supply for 2034. And as I mentioned earlier, so industrial growth, it's a key driver for our plant in Lincolnshire. And we're also in conversation with the Bacton Energy Hub in Norfolk about their hydrogen plans and their need for water. And we're also investigating how we can make these plants carbon neutral, so through generating our own electricity, potentially using offshore wind. And we've commissioned Ricardo to undertake a study for us that will help inform that strategy. And so Hamish is here with me today. He's part of the team working on that for us in terms of potential links to hydrogen. And so I'll hand over to Hamish now to sort of provide an overview of the challenges and the plans associated with hydrogen in our region.
Thank you very much, Alexa. Yeah, and thank you very much to the organisers for allowing me to come along and talk. So I'm trying to just give you a really brief flavour, really, of kind of what's happening in the hydrogen world, because it's got kind of big implications for water in the UK. So back in 2021, the UK government put together the hydrogen strategy, and one of the kind of key points of that was to have 10 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2030. That's essentially a very big kind of target to reach. And kind of you might be asking, well, what are we going to use this hydrogen for? Well, there's lots of different kind of uses. There's lots of new uses. So in the kind of trying to decarbonize our existing industry, our mobility, hydrogen is one of the many options. I'm not saying it's the silver bullet, because it's certainly not. It's one of the options. So it could be replacing natural gas in industry for raising heat, could be for power generation, for transportation fuel, or even just a feedstock to create other fuels, such as kind of SAF or e-methanol. But we mustn't also forget that actually hydrogen is already used a lot in fertilizer production and petroleum refining. So if we can actually kind of replace that kind of what we call grey hydrogen, so hydrogen made from natural gas, with low carbon hydrogen, then we're also helping decarbonize that. I've already dropped in one of the colours of hydrogen there, grey, that you will also hear quite a lot about green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. So very quickly, kind of green hydrogen is hydrogen that's made from water electrolysis using renewable power. So splitting water, like you might have done at school in your science labs, into hydrogen and oxygen, and then capturing that hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is very similar to grey hydrogen in that you take natural gas and you reform it, steam methane reforming, to create the hydrogen, but then the CO2 that's produced, the carbon dioxide, is then captured, and that carbon dioxide can then be stored in like disused oil fields or other kind of underground storage, or put to alternative uses. So kind of low carbon hydrogen is a much better way of describing kind of all the different colours, because we want to make sure it is actually decarbonising. And that's one of the reasons why we have to make sure the water going in to use for the hydrogen is also kind of not a massive kind of emitter of carbon dioxide. So just to give an idea, 10 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen. Green hydrogen needs around 50 litres of water per kilogram of hydrogen. Blue needs about 20 litres. That equates to about 95 million litres per day for 10 gigawatts. And that's the target for 2030. 2040, 2050, that just gets higher and higher and higher. So next slide, please. Right. So it is slightly worrying when you think kind of that we need all that water. I would say kind of we're probably not going to reach that kind of 10 gigawatt target, kind of spoiler alert. It's a target, we're not going to reach it, but we will reach it at some point very soon. The way the government are kind of trying to kind of get all this hydrogen production going is through a number of different kind of mechanisms. There's the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund that set out quite a number of projects, and in the kind of east area, there's kind of Felixstowe, Suffolk Hydrogen Hub, Conrad Energy, and Lowestoft. Those projects, to be completely honest, have stalled a bit. They're not really moving forward as fast as the government hoped. There's also the hydrogen allocation rounds. So it's like a competition to kind of get into to allow your hydrogen to be subsidized through the hydrogen production business model. And I know there's lots of different acronyms and names I'm throwing in here, so kind of bear with me. But the hydrogen production business model is probably one of the best subsidies for hydrogen kind of globally, really. It sets like a strike price for hydrogen close to natural gas price. So therefore kind of removing any kind of financial barrier for anyone adopting hydrogen in place of natural gas. So are you doing it through these kind of hydrogen allocation round or HAR competitions? They've been a bit delayed with the elections last year. Things just haven't moved quite as fast. So we've got the HAR1 projects. There's 11 of those being announced, 125 megawatts. So quite a way off 10 gigawatts. And we're expecting the results from HAR2 kind of any month now. It's meant to be last month, the month before, hopefully very soon. That's about 875. So between the two, that's only 1/10 of the target for 2030. So there needs to be a really step up in kind of size of the next competition the government run, or a kind of repositioning of the targets. If you look at kind of that 10 gigawatts, 95 million litres per day, nationally, there is enough water. Now, before everyone kind of shouts me down, I'm very aware that actually regionally, locally, it's a completely different story. Small hydrogen projects, that's not too bad. And in fact, there's one in Aberdeen, the Kintor project, which has got an extraction license from the river, which I've completely forgotten the name of, in Aberdeen. But that's not going to be the solution. These projects get bigger and bigger. It's just not going to be feasible to have extraction licenses from rivers or use any other sources. The really big kind of production sites are going to have to use desalination. So one such project already mentioned was the Bacton Energy Hub. They're talking about blue hydrogen and green hydrogen production. It's a real energy hub. So they're exporting hydrogen to kind of the national network that's planned, potentially even exporting overseas. There's CO2 storage. There's kind of everything's happening in that site. Really exciting kind of potential project for the area. I mentioned kind of a national network. Project Union, something if you want to be interested, just have a look at. It's really, really decades away kind of from full implementation. But the idea of having a hydrogen gas network, kind of network of pipelines across the whole of the UK, and that will be interconnecting with Bacton, with kind of Mablethorpe, with the Humber industrial cluster, with Easington just north of the Humber, and then many other locations. So allowing industries and end users of hydrogen to connect with the producers. So there's lots and lots going on. I hope it is kind of a concern that we've got to make sure the water is available and making sure that hydrogen producers know to ask for the water and to think about it at the very early stages of planning. I think with desalination, there is a kind of clear pathway to kind of allowing kind of for sufficient water supply. So very excited to be kind of working with Anglian Water and on this project, looking at how we can have net zero desalination. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hamish. Daniel, so I think I'm the last of the kind of speakers we've got today, and my name's Paul Mumford. I'm a project director looking after a couple of large-scale housing sites. I sit on the Water Resources East board as a non-exec director, and I work with a company called Urban and Civic, and we're a master developer, so not dissimilar to some of the ways that new homes are delivered across the eastern region. We take large housing sites, large areas of land, and get them ready for then house builders to come on and build. So some of the things that are really relevant to us are an emphasis on litres per person per day in terms of drinking water, and all of the infrastructure and the planning regime that goes around that Daniel and Ben and Lindsay have touched on as well. The things that I kind of wanted to just talk about, I suppose, is in a sense, how do I see the development industry, the housing development industry, looking at all of the issues that we're talking about when we come to water. So some of the things here, and this isn't rocket science, everybody will kind of recognise these types of statistics. We're in a really dry area, and we have a really high growth pressure around growth for new homes. The bits that I then come to think on, and you'll start to see I've used the word nervousness on quite a bit on this slide, because as a non-expert looking at the water industry and looking at how things work, but trying really to get a handle on how I can understand this to the degree I need to allow me to deliver land and then build new homes for people to live in the way that we kind of want to be living these days. There are some things that stand out in the way that we're managing the growth pressures around water in particular. So I'm really aware of the water resources management plan, and I've heard of things like the Grafton pipeline transfer, the Fen reservoir. Kind of these are things that are now in kind of common parlance when you're talking about planning or new development. And that there are some things that are going to come in on the shorter term, and some things that will take more time. Phrases like water neutrality are quite nerve-wracking, and that's partly because we can look at what's happened around nutrient neutrality in other parts of the country and sense that it hasn't quite been a smooth transition to work out a way of making things operate quickly and efficiently when it comes to these no doubt really important and environmental issues. But when we also look at particularly around Cambridge, the emerging local plans, so the pressure for growth and the identification of sites for new growth, the aim is to accommodate all development that's currently in the existing and the emerging local plans. So the message to me is that this is a kind of solvable issue, or it's a doable do, I suppose. That's what's coming out. So effort needs to go in, work needs to be done, but there are things here that can be resolved to allow the housing growth that is desperately needed to happen. And then water credits is something that's coming up on the rails, but at the same time, I'm kind of understanding that this is about purchasing credits which are made available by installing measures into existing buildings, but it's not clear yet exactly how those things are going to come through. And when we look at other areas, and the example might be biodiversity net gain, and the development of a market around those, it's clearly something that takes a bit of time. And you can run the comparable as well across to carbon offsetting, which is something we talk about a lot, but has its detractors as well as its supporters. So I can see that the water resources management plan's been delayed, although it seems like it's almost there. That makes me a bit nervous. I haven't got the detail about the credit system, although it gets talked about a lot. So that makes me nervous. And the example to go and look at in Sussex North is something that doesn't really feel like as a credit system it's off the ground yet. Darwin Green, locally, where we've seen direct intervention from the Secretary of State, didn't impose a Grampian condition. So that's a planning condition that says until one thing's happened, you can't build more homes in relation to either the Grafton pipeline transfer or the reservoir. So that kind of tells you that again there is a continued sort of welcoming and desire to allow conditions to be in place to promote housing growth. But with the water resources management plan delayed, I'm not clear quite how long those kind of conclusions will hold. So I'm looking around for ways to get to make me nervous, and it's linked. It's not the same as drinkable water, but the wastewater treatment works for Cambridge is a decision that's really relevant and important that has been delayed at least a couple of times. So all of these things, as your poor old housing developer, are things that are making me feel a bit uncertain about what's happening. try and kind of set things out in, I said, short term, medium term, longer term. The longer term across on the right here, big things will happen. So the Grafham pipeline transfer, and particularly the Fens reservoir, we can see that all of the answers might not be in place, and there are issues around. It's not just building the reservoir, is it? But it's actually allowing it to fill up, and that itself is going to take a long time, and means you need to predict the kind of levels of flow in the ELUs and what have you. But at least you can see that something's happening, and we recognise that that's a long-term plan. And down on the left-hand side, things we can do today. So we've found on some of our sites that actually you need to go and check that the fixtures and fittings that are being talked about are being put in place, and if you can actually keep check of what's happening, you can at least give yourself confidence that this kind of ongoing reduction, the like of which we're seeing in the progress report from the water companies, will happen. And a water labelling scheme is something that you can get your head around, can't you? Because that's been something that's been really effective when it comes to white goods and appliances. The one in the middle, building regs and a water credit scheme, really important. And this is when you look at Daniel's pie chart of government interventions and the importance that they will bring. These are things that we can lobby about and we can wait for, but the importance to the development sector of having things captured in building regulations can't be underestimated, because that's the thing that kind of, in a sense, makes things the new normal. And one of the things, as you'd expect, that house builders and developers like myself will look at is the cash implications, the cost implications of new and different ways of doing things, and where do they sit? Because everybody along that route, from landowner through developers to house builders, wants to take their cut of the funds that are being generated, and there's always a bit of a tussle about which part of that supply chain, if you like, needs to bear these costs. Building regs can really help with that, because it makes it really clear, and it kind of puts it into the normal band, and then it's clear that it needs to be covered. One thing we do look at quite a bit, and I think has got quite a bit of traction within the industry, is the Future Homes Hub and the work that they're doing. What I think that's showing, which is also what we're finding in the sites that we're working on at the moment, is that getting to around 90 litres per person per day is relatively conceptually simple. Fixtures and fittings and behaviour change, that there are increasingly some examples of how that can actually happen by just encouraging people and making sure they're thinking much more about water. To go below 90, which is being talked about quite a bit, and we are starting to see certainly aspirations within local plans and evidence coming through a bit at planning appeals that people are starting to refer to getting to 19 below that in terms of litres per person per day. Seems like it costs a lot more. It seems like it requires different or new infrastructure, different skills, and it's relatively untested. So again, this isn't my slide for being nervous, but if I were nervous, then that would be something that I'd be looking at there. That brings additional cost, and again, it goes back to the importance of building regs and the regulation that surrounds the development industry. And then just briefly, a kind of example of what we're doing. So we've heard a bit today about the importance of evidence and the importance of data to show water usage, and this is relevant, of course, to the housing sector here, but there's equally, Lindsay's mentioned this in relation to agriculture. So what we're doing, and this kind of feeds on work that was the Bidwell Water Savers project, which was a housing scheme in Houghton Regis in Bedfordshire, is actually we're working as Urban and Civic. We're working with the agency WRE to look at how do you go and encourage people to change the behaviours and the way that they use water. So our houses, new houses at the moment, people are using around 120 litres per person per day. And we're having a programme set up now where we think through behaviour change and encouraging people and explaining the way that people use water, we're hoping to really bring that down. The Bidwell Water Savers project, as you can see on the bottom right hand of the slide there, which I think was about 900 homes or so, had these significant impacts in the amount of water that people used per day, from something that was really about going and engaging with people and talking and saying, look, can you understand that this is a really important resource, and what can we do? And so for us, it's really that, as ever, it's the balance of what we can do in terms of the way we build the homes and what the planning system can give to that, what the government interventions are going to be, and again, critically, building regs in that. And then what we're seeing here is just when you have that, when people move in, they will be alert to these kinds of things and really willing to get engaged in it if you can put in place the right kind of program to do that. So there's quite a lot of things that we're thinking about. Overall, we feel it's good that this is a really important issue that is being addressed. But again, if I go back to the start, the messaging around this is that it's something that can be and must be resolved, because for every time that we think water is important, you can guarantee there's somebody else that's thinking, well, housing growth is important, just as much so. So it's a really interesting balance that we're in. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul. And now we're going to come to the Q&A session. So can I ask everybody who has spoken today to switch their cameras back on again, please? And I have been quickly scanning through the Q&A. So thank you to everybody who's put questions onto that. And so I'll start with one around environmental destinations. Are the current challenging environmental destinations still feasible, especially in places like Cambridge?
I can pick this one up if you like, Paul.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's actually a really good question, and the answer is we're going to work on exactly that question. So the environmental destination stuff that we talked about before is going to be exploring that, and actually the Environment Agency are right now preparing an updated set of scenarios. So they'll look by and large very similar to what we talked about before, and plan on these kind of higher ambition versus lower ambition scenarios. But encouraging, I guess, our regional plan that we're reporting on now set out how the region does have sufficient options to meet what is currently called the enhanced environmental destination. The key question is about the pace of delivery of that, and how we have options at our disposal that can come through quick enough to allow potentially environmental damaging or less sustainable abstractions to be turned off. Now, I would say that's from a water company perspective. The big question that we need to start answering is how other sectors with abstraction licenses implicated in these scenarios can accommodate those changes to their licenses. So all the stuff that's happening around local resource options, the agri supply demand balance work that the Environment Agency is doing, that will all start to piece that together. But interestingly, when we think about Cambridge, we did in fact do a piece of work early last year, linked to the water scarcity group that explored some of those really high pace, high growth ambition scenarios. And what we did start to find that was dependent on the pace, we may actually need some more options that are yet to be determined and yet to be developed. But this is now going to be a big piece of a big area of focus under the national framework and within regional groups and companies to make sure we do have a really good, robust suite of potential supply options in tandem with demand side options to make sure we can accommodate this stuff. So yeah, in short, we're going to be working on that. But I would also, just a final point is, I want to urge us not to think about Cambridge as a local hotspot. Cambridge, the solutions to Cambridge's challenges and any other area you might place around our region are going to come from the region. You know, Cambridge is going to be dependent in the future in large part on the Fens Reservoir, which is not in Cambridge. It's not in Cambridge Water's supply area. And in part, right now in the early 2030s, there's actually a national initiative using the Grand Union Canal transfer with Affinity Water in Watershore South East. So these little hotspot areas are actually regional and national challenges that we've all got to work collectively on. So it's a great question. Thanks very much.
Question or a number of questions around desal, if you can. So the first bit of this is, when will the statutory consultees be involved in the process? How about the impacts on sensitive habitats, particularly in the areas that have been selected? And what about the brine and the salt that's produced? So Alexa.
Okay, I'll take those one at a time. So, in terms of engaging with our statutory consultees, so we're already having some one-to-ones with statutory organisations. We're carrying out a stakeholder mapping exercise at the moment, and we'll be looking to establish a stakeholder partnership by the start of the new AMP to work with us as we have developed with the reservoir programme, to work with and to help sort of inform us sort of through the site selection process, as it proved really valuable on the reservoirs, and so we're planning to replicate that sort of process on the desalination projects. So yeah, but within the next few months, hopefully you'll be hearing from us. The second point, sorry, what was Paul? Second.
The sensitive habitats and the brine.
Yes, so the sensitive habitats, so mentioned, so I think that's in reference to the 2 sites that have been identified so far. We are going back through that process and undertaking a very robust site selection process, and on every step of that, the impacts in the ecology will be taken into account and be a factor in that. And once we have that methodology planned out within the next couple of months, we'll be sharing that with the statutory consultees to review and feedback and make sure that we are considering everything that we should be considering. So yeah, that will play a key part in us helping us identify the optimal sites for the desal plants. And then in terms of the brine, so traditionally what's done elsewhere in the world, it's discharged back into sea via a very long outfall. But we have some research underway with Cranfield University looking at the source water, but also the characteristics of the brine waste. And so we're trying to really understand what that's going to be made up of, what that would look like. And we're also carrying out studies in terms of what else can we do with that brine waste. So do we need to just put it back into sea, or can we find other uses for it? So very early days with that at the moment, but we are looking into options for that.
Okay, thanks. And an associated question for Hamish, which is, how good is salt water for hydrogen production?
It's a really good question and quite topical, actually, because just today the Scottish Government have just released some funding for a consortium, it's Glasgow University and some others, to look at the feasibility of using salt water directly into water electrolysis. And there's a number of other companies investigating it, because if you can do that, it just does take out the step. I think the real challenge is most water electrolysis requires not just potable water, but actually kind of very, very pure water. So there's normally a kind of reverse osmosis kind of system built into the electrolyzer to ensure that there's kind of no contaminants going into the electrolyzers. Obviously, as electrolyzer technology develops, hopefully they'll be less susceptible to contaminants, but kind of saltwater, direct use salt water is a really exciting area that's currently under investigation.
Okay. Some questions on smart metering. Are residents able to request smart meters? Should smart meters be mandatory? And is Urban and Civic providing all of the homes that they're building, or are they requiring those who are building out the homes on their sites to fit smart meters and also potentially putting in water butts? So Paul, do you want to go first on the Urban and Civic ones, and then we'll come to the other more general smart meters?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we'll go specific then general. I think it's with at the moment not all of our homes do. So partly this is the bit I think, Paul, you just picked up, that Urban and Civic, we're not a house builder. So what we're doing is we're saying to the house builders, when you come onto these sites, this is something that's really important, and we are now starting to require as part of our contracts that house builders put water meters in, and we know that that's useful and we know it's important because the evidence does suggest that it's one of the best ways of getting people to think more about reducing their water. One thing to think about as well is that although it's desperately important now, for schemes that received their planning consents a few years ago, water wasn't quite as high up the urgency agenda as it is now. So one of the benefits for me, being a little bit selfish about it, of working on large scale schemes is that you get a few more bites at the cherry. So up at Waterbeach, just north of Cambridge, our first phase of development has been through on one way of doing things. And it's in our second phase that we're starting to plan now that we can start to implement more things like this. And similarly with water butts, so yes, almost all of the houses do that, and some house builders are much more willing to do that, and some are a bit less so. Everybody now has got their own kind of sustainability targets to meet and to make sure the credentials are there. And water butts is actually something that's pretty straightforward to get introduced as part of that.
Anybody take up the should smart meters be mandatory, and can people request them?
I'll talk on that. Yes, it's a similar picture for us at WRE in that we're very supportive of the rollout of smart metering and the ability to track, as I mentioned earlier, whether there are leakages and where household consumption is being brought down. As for whether they're mandatory or not, the targets for each water company, that is a statutory target which is set out by government. For individual rollouts, that is on a water company by water company basis. So it's up to them whether they determine who gets a smart meter and when, which again is I'd say for Cambridge, I can't speak to specifically because that is down to Cambridge Water. But yeah, just to say that we are very supportive of the rollout as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Question: what is smart farming? So there's going to be a smart farming trial, but what is that likely to entail? And aligned with that, should water availability influence the nature of farming practices and crops?
Shall I take that one?
Yes, please.
So looking at the first one, then, so how are we defining smart farming? That's a very good question. It's one of the follies of jargon, isn't it? So I would interpret smart farming as agricultural methods which use a technology which either hasn't been developed yet or hasn't been used in that application. So just by way of example, then in the sorts of things we'll be looking at in this smart farming study are near real-time metering of water, so smart metering for agriculture, if you will, on the basis that we think that if we can capture data from abstraction data from multiple points in near real time, it will give us a much better ability, especially in a flow-based abstraction system in a river, to optimize the amount of water that we can take from that river without damaging the environment. It will also look at other things, other technologies associated anywhere where we're using water for farming. So, for example, in the technology to apply water to crops, can we use new technology to apply water much more frugally, much more accurately? Can we use technology, crop sensing technology, which is capable of working out how thirsty a crop is? Can we use that kind of technology to be much more targeted in the way we apply water? So it's using technology at a very high level to improve the way that we manage water, both from a supply and demand viewpoint. So, and this project is really is it a scoping study? I know it's not quite the right word. Well, what we're hoping from this study is to come up with a range of studies to look at much more closely. So it's, what's the state of the art, and what are the various art forms? On the second question, which was, does availability of water influence the kind of agricultural practice? Without doubt. I mean, there is a very, very close relationship between access to water and the kind of cropping that can be pursued. So, and that's in terms of well, if you look at it in this country, very in England, very generally speaking, if you remove irrigation from the equation, we tend to grow grass where it rains, because grass is particularly sensitive to and responds very well to rainfall. Other crops are less sensitive to the pattern of the way that water is supplied. And when we talk about crops and irrigation and the need for water, people very often speak in terms of crops that are more resilient or resistant to drought, or crops that are thirsty. And I would say it's more a matter of crop sensitivity to water, that some crops are much more sensitive to an absence or indeed an excess of water than others. And one crop that's very often cited as being a water nasty is potatoes, and it's a very important crop in the East. And actually through the whole crop life, a potato doesn't use that much more water. So it's actually very small amount of extra water compared to, for example, a cereal crop. The difference is that cereal crops tend to grow, especially winter cereal crops, they grow over a much longer period. And if they do get a bit thirsty, they can cope with it a bit. And if if that thirst is quenched later on, then sometimes there's damage done, but but not always. But with a potato crop, it's incredibly sensitive to water, and also it's a very short growing season, relatively speaking. And when they get really motoring, boy, do they use some water. And if you start cutting that or restricting water at that point, there's very serious consequences, not just to the yield, but also to the quality and the stability of the crop and all those sorts of things. So, I mean, it's an interesting question in terms of, so should we be modifying our agriculture in relation to water shortages or water constraints in the future? Let's debate it. Our starting point at this stage is to say, can we modify the way we access water to optimize that access, to make sure we're making best use of the water that's available to us and using it very wisely when we do have it.
Thank you. What I'm going to do now is that we're coming up to the end of the planned session. And so what I'll do is, but we still have some more questions that people have asked. If people want to stay on for a bit longer question and answer session, then people are very welcome to do that. And a number of the speakers will be staying on as well to participate in that Q&A. But if you want to leave now, then please do. Hope you've enjoyed and benefited from the update. I'd like to thank on everybody's behalf, everybody who has spoken and contributed to the presentation today on the update of our regional plan. And thank you very much for participating. For those who want to stay, please stay. For those who need to go, then please feel free to go, and we'll reconvene in about 3 minutes' time. Thanks very much.